live from Brussels. It's ZN Live, and today we have an expert guest, Philippe Borremans. I have known Philippe for 20 years. I think we've established when he was at IBM doing events on blogging and crisis communication already then. Philippe has extensive communication knowledge and especially focused on digital communication and crisis management. He works as an independent consultant for organizations such as the EU, WHO, UN, and much, much more. And he's been really focused on emergency communication, prevention, and AI, which I think is a very interesting area to look at. We're very, very happy to have you on the show. And I want to start with one question, something that you've been talking about, you've been exploring, which is the communication world ready for AI, in your judgment?
Well, first of all, thanks for having me on the show. Yeah, it's 20 years. Yeah, 20 years. We're not getting younger. On your question, I just did a survey end of this year with 84 communicators, a bit, globally, on their use of AI in the context and specifically in the area I work on, which is risk, crisis, and emergency communication. That brought up some good insights, which I think can be generalized. There's a lot of talk about AI in comms. There's a lot of focus on the AI application in the context of content creation. But there's not a lot of talk or case studies on strategically using AI to transform either the profession or a team or the way that we run corporate communications or even emergency communications. That doesn't mean that there's not any initiatives. I see them happening in the emergency management sphere in the US, for instance, but we're a long way from actually looking at that strategic approach of AI. One thing that came out of the survey I did was the need for education. All the professionals, and this was a survey with senior professionals, younger professionals as well, all of them confirmed that there's a huge need for communicators to be educated on what that actually is AI, what it can mean, how it can be used, etc. Because there's a lot of hype and a lot of crazy stories going around as well.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, this has been the year, 23 has been the year of AI hype. And, every post you have, 25 things you can do with AI, 5 AI tools that are going to change your life. And the reality is that ChatGPT is great, and you can make poems in the tone of Hemingway for a sci-fi movie on a Netflix series. But the reality is using it in a practical way, I think, takes a lot more practice, a lot more skills. And you mentioned training, but the reality is that this technology has really been online and widely available only for a year. So the trainers, if they were honest, are actually just saying, look, I've been doing this for 3 weeks. Let me now train you. So I think there is a real challenge, and we've been using actually AI tools at ZN. We've been doing some great visualization work, some video animation work, things where it accelerates what you do. And I think for that, it's fantastic. But what you're talking about and changing the way you work and really getting deep into it, I think is quite difficult. And people have a natural resistance to change. And I don't think a lot of communicators are really embracing this. I think they know that it's there, they know they have to do it, but they're finding it very difficult. Did you have some experience with use cases where people were using AI and it was having an immediate transformative effect, or is it still kind of early days and early things? I don't know if you have an example that you can share.
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple of things in what you just said. First of all, AI is not new. It's been around for a couple of years, and not just 4 years. It's been longer, in one way or the other. The only difference now is that it's publicly available through a chat interface. So we can chat with it and talk to it and ask it questions, what have you, without being a data specialist or an analyst. So that is the shift, which is important to recognize. But yeah, I've seen serious changes and some organizations and people looking at this from a purely strategic point of view and then looking at how it can be really transformative. A case study by by one of our well-known researchers in crisis communications, Timothy Coombs, took his crisis methodology and worked with an organization to systematize that through AI into a platform, and that is strategic crisis communication empowered and augmented by AI, meaning that it's a platform where, depending on the case or the crisis you're confronted with, the system will suggest different options that you have, but based on a sound, scientific, proven methodology. That is serious stuff. It's not asking ChatGPT to write your reactive statement when you're in a crisis, which is not a bad idea. I mean, it saves you time, which is the resource that we don't have in a crisis situation. So it's not one is better than the other. But you were asking about, let's say, a more strategic approach. That is one. Another one that I'm working on is using AI to create and run simulation exercises. It's crazy to see, but there's like two extremes in crisis scenarios building. It's either too simple or it's either too complicated. There's these crisis scenarios where you start with an earthquake and then there's also a zombie attack, and then later on you even have wildfire.
Zombie attacks are the best.
Right. Yeah. They're always fun, but so I'm looking now at I'm working with a small startup where we're looking at not only one AI system but around 20 AI agents, which are independent AI entities which can talk to each other and work together. Where that would then be used to create scenarios, but also run them and then later on analyze them so that you have after action reports. And of course, the human is playing a role. The humans will play their own role, but you can never, it's very difficult to set up a simulation where all your stakeholders are actually human and present and acting, because then you need a huge bunch of actors, which is very expensive, what have you. So here, these AI agents are trained on their specific roles, and they actually run the simulation with humans, but then with all the benefits of being able to go back in time, see what decision A had as an impact on, on the next level of the simulation. So that's another approach, and there are different other ones as well. And I think it's moving in that direction, but it's very limited for the moment. Yeah.
Yeah, the crisis simulation stuff is fantastic. It reminds me actually of War Games, the movie, which ages me quite a lot. But basically, if you ask an AI, and this was I think 30 years ago, to create a simulation, make sure that AI doesn't take over NATO's systems and create an actual Third World War. That was the theme of this very good and precise movie on the topic. But I think it's very interesting to say that you create a simulation. And, I think that 20 years ago, when we were doing that event at IBM, there was a crisis simulation discussion on using technology. AI was not there as a powerful tool. But coming back to the practical use, indeed, and yesterday, OpenAI announced that the GPTs were going live. Now, for those in creating a GPT store, for those who don't know, GPTs are basically a space where you can create your own ChatGPT version with specific instructions that stay, so it's not the general, and then you can publish that for others to use and perhaps monetize it. And I think in crisis communication, what's quite interesting is the idea that you could put all the data, like the guidelines, the specific information, and all those things, so that when you ask, okay, what do I do in this situation, then all the data is already connected. Now, we have to be careful with information quality and whether the AI might hallucinate. So, I mean, I think we're still in a moment where you really have to check, because you might get completely wrong response from the AI. Now, in crisis prevention, so you talked about crisis simulation. Does it work, and can it be applied to an actual crisis? And have you seen it being used effectively in a real life crisis?
Yeah. So the example that you give is of course using ChatGPT, for instance, which is publicly available. But the real use for serious organizations then would be that you have an open source alternative which exists, that you put it on your own service behind your own firewall, have it double checked or triple checked by your IT people who supposedly then know what they're doing, and then training on your own data. So at that point in time, you have a system that works with your own knowledge and experience. And then, of course, it can be very useful. And I think that is the safest way to use these things as a corporation or a company. I've used GPTs then, which I trained for crisis response. Yes, because first of all, if you're a professional in this field with enough amount of experience, you have that critical thinking. It's based on your own knowledge, on your own data that you know is correct, based on experiences that you've lived before, based also on methodologies which are recognized within the crisis, risk, or emergency management space. And then, of course, there's the human element. You're a professional, you double check things. If you use it like that, then it's really about saving time. I mean, there's nothing worse during a crisis starting with a blank page. And although the best practice says that your top 5 crises need to be prepared, that your reactive statements are there, you just need to fill in the gaps and what have you. Most organizations, unfortunately, don't have that. But that is losing time, and you don't have time during a crisis. So in that context, using a trained model with your own experience, and then you as a human, of course, double checking things, even then, that saves an enormous amount of time. And that in itself is already something which is very powerful. So only that small element that I'm talking about is so powerful and so useful for us crisis, risk, and emergency communicators that it's already very valuable. Yeah.
But
I think that's a very good point.
Yeah, if I may, Philip, because you're talking, and I'm trying to put myself on the shoes of some of the audience who's watching us, and there may be some communicators that didn't even try yet about using AI. So does it mean for them to understand that then you can get a GPT, and then by telling it this is right and this is wrong, it learns on itself, and then by there more and more, the more that you tell it how it works, it gives you the right answers? And is it complicated then to establish what we call the input or the queries that you make on the how much is that important? How do people need to learn how to train the GPT?
Well, it starts with the knowledge of your own, let's say, your own procedures and your own work, right? I mean, you would be amazed how many people do stuff but don't really know exactly different steps it takes, like in a workflow or a procedural way. You have to look at a procedure. Writing a press release is a procedure. Writing a crisis communications plan is a procedure. There's a method to it. It's not just creative writing. And so you have to know that already exactly. You have to document that. Then take the best examples that you have, go back to previous crises or communication campaigns. I'm talking crisis because it's my specialty, but it could be a campaign which was very successful, understand why it was successful, and then use that to train the model. And then, of course, the more that you use the model and correct the model, say, you actually chat with the model and say, this is not correct. This is the correct answer. Please, keep that in mind. The thing will start learning. But it starts with a good understanding of what your procedures are. How do you devise work? How do you split it up in tasks? Because the system thinks in tasks. And then giving it, of course, a correct knowledge base, a base that is correct. Could be scientifically correct, could be simply correct based on your experience, or a combination of both, which I often do. And then you would get, in most cases, very, very relevant answers. I mean, the models that I've tried and the couple of GPTs I created, one for simulation, for scenario drafting, one for crisis plan creation, the returns I get are on par with some stuff that you would get from a specialized agency. Now, I'm not saying that specialized agencies are not needed anymore, right? But it's a good start. You don't want to start with a blank page again. It's just easier to have a first draft, and it's always a first draft with AI. And then, of course, you augment it with your own knowledge and with the knowledge of other people working on the same project, if it's a campaign, for instance.
Yeah, I think what you're saying is we're not quite good at the point where AI is going to replace people or agencies, but it's certainly going to replace people who can't use AI. I think, because that time saving, that new perspective, that acceleration, I think, is fundamental. I also want to give a shout out to Daniel, who said Happy Friday. So we got Daniel, I think, in Spain saying hi. And coming back to another, phenomenon which could be called a permanent crisis, which is that we have an election coming up in the EU, and of course elections all around the world. And when you're communicating in an election, you never know if you're in a crisis or if it's just Monday, because basically every day something comes up, and you have to rethink how do we respond to that. Now, the big discussion right now is AI going to amplify misinformation, create deepfakes, and basically destroy democracy as we know it? And what I want to know from you, because obviously understanding crisis management is really very close to this space, is do you think that we can use AI for good, which means for detection, for rebuttal, for actually lowering the impact of this misinformation? And as a party, should parties be setting up their AI messaging platforms to basically be able to anticipate fake news, misinformation, and respond in much faster time than they usually do? Do you have any thoughts and experience on that?
Yeah, I mean, it's like every technology, right? It depends on how you use it. You can use it for positive and negative things. And it's exactly the same thing with AI. It's the same with the internet. It's the same with social media. So it's always depending on what is the objective and who and which kind of entity is using it for what kind of objective. We have, I think, more than 40 elections, 40, this year, which is incredible. And of course, you will see negative use of AI. Of course, it's become very easy to create deepfakes, to create all these things that you mentioned. At the same time, the same technology allows us now to exactly see what is a deepfake and what is not a deepfake, or to do predictive analytics. We can see now crisis is coming. We didn't have that before. I mean, of course, we had Twitter analytics, which allowed us to see the next outbreak of influenza, for instance, and that's an old process. It's not new, but that took a lot of analysis, a lot of data analysis, and took some time. Now we have platforms which are specialized in predictive analytics and can see groups of people or organizations gathering together, even on the dark web, which we don't know a lot about as a normal mortal, and see how these groups get together and start to prepare for a influence campaign, for instance. So these, again, it's technology is one thing, then there's the two different uses. And of course, the mass of the amount of information created in itself is already a problem. That has nothing to do with AI. The segmentation of audiences, that is, the bubbles that exist are human biases, which are the most dangerous ones. So again, that all these things have nothing to do with AI, but I do think that the technology allows us as well to counteract the negative views. It all depends on who are the players, who is prepared for that, coming back to the education need, and of course, which kind of money is available.
Yeah, which is interesting because there is a lot of money available during elections, but allocating that money intelligently is difficult, because often you have the temptation to go old school and to buy advertising space when you should be monitoring information trends in different spaces. Now we're in January 2024, so everybody is doing their trends. Now we're talking about AI, misinformation, elections. What are the 3 trends that you're most excited about for 2024 and maybe worried about? And of course, I guess AI is one that you're looking at very closely. Do you think we're at the end of the hype cycle, or will it start going mainstream, or still in the middle? Where do you feel we are in AI implementation?
Yeah, it's always difficult, right, to do these kind of predictions. If you look at AI in the sphere of communications, our profession, what I think that we'll see is the first cases of, for instance, agencies training their own AI models, as I said, on their own servers, behind their own firewall for their dedicated operations. I think we'll see great case studies coming out of that. Already some very smart agencies and yourselves are using this, but it will even be pushed further really as an operational integration on how you do your work day to day. I think that we'll see. On the software side, I think we'll see technology companies creating vertical AI applications, meaning, one for a certain industry, one for in communications, for instance, one specific for content creation, which exists already, but other ones as well. So much more vertical, very precise. I think that will be a business model that we'll see popping up. What I haven't seen yet is a serious use of AI in monitoring. So all the big monitoring companies, they do say we've integrated AI, but I haven't really seen like this strategic approach on data crunching and using AI and surfacing trends and doing things, except for some of the platforms which are very specific around predictive analytics again. So that will be interesting to follow. Apart from that, when we move away from AI and communications as such, the trends are there. They're confirmed by the many reports I started reading, and also by the last one that I did a quick analysis on of the World Economic Forum. The climate crisis is there, very tangible, and that will influence so many things. And then, of course, the instability. And I'm not thinking about big world wars and what have you, but the more slower burning instabilities, which come from, of course, the different wars that we have ongoing, but also economic warfare, also migration, which will happen naturally because of the climate crisis. All these intertangled crises. And that is very difficult, I think, for a lot of people to get a grasp on. And I think that will be very important this year because, again, a lot of elections are happening, but also the climate crisis is just moving ahead. And unfortunately, we humans are not really moving ahead in the right direction to counter it. So, yeah.
Yeah, I see, Philip, actually, it's true what you're saying. AI is with us already for a while. We have seen how, for example, this has been changing our lives. For example, I have Siri in different places here at home, for example, or Alexa in other places and all that. But it's true that what we see is the potential that AI has also to bring devices, that even wearables, that we're having to a next level, to another point. No? So what do you think about that? Do you see maybe something coming into that? You know that we are a lot also into VR and all that. How do you see AI influencing on devices?
Well, I think the first announcements have been made, right? So you've got a couple of AI-specific devices, either one that you clip on or through a hanger, and then, of course, the big mobile phone brands will start, and the first announcements have been made, right, on integrating AI into the technical device that we carry, all of us, every single day. So that is a almost natural progression. As for additional devices, I think we already have this smartphone with us all day. Some people will augment that with maybe a clip-on thing or a hanger. But, otherwise we're going to be wearing like 15 different devices to do things. And that I don't see that happening. On VR that you mentioned, again, it's a device issue. But I do see applications of virtual reality. One which is very interesting then in my area of work in emergency preparedness and risk communication is, for instance, training people who live close to flooding zones, train them through VR on how to prepare their home. And it's been going on for some time, and it shows that people retain the training they received much better than they would, sit in a classical workshop or even a face-to-face tabletop simulation. The results are much better because they had this device on their head, but they found themselves immersed, literally and figuratively, in an environment which they knew. A home, they were trained on simple things. Where do you place your sandbags? How do you place that? What do you secure? Electrical danger, how do you manage that? And so those very specific applications for virtual reality are definitely worth looking at. And the proof is there. I mean, the retention is much better than in other traditional capacity building methods.
Yeah, I think that's a very, very interesting point. And the reality is that I think once you have useful use cases where, okay, I can train these people for this, then it becomes a category, and then you say, okay, now we should roll this out because it's just much better. And I think it's going to be interesting this year, the combination of VR AR with some AI thrown in that allows you maybe to make your setup faster. By the way, Harold says hi, Philip, and I want to come to one quick question before we move on to recommendations, which is, as a young communicator, for people who are starting today, who don't have our wisdom and experience, what do you tell them that they need to learn or be aware of? What's your kind of words of advice for somebody starting in communication today?
Well, I think there's a couple of things. First, it's a specific attitude, I think. It is the attitude of critical thinking. And young professionals maybe don't think of that at first, but and now I'm sounding as a very old guy, but when I was at PR school, critical thinking was something that we were trained on every single day. Reading between the lines, understanding why things are framed and positioned in this way or another. And that is something that I think is getting a bit lost. So critical thinking as an attitude and a practice that should be ingrained. And then secondly, when it comes about AI and the profession, what I would say at this point in time is you'll get AI, but AI will not bring you value if you don't know how to do strategic planning and how to do measurement and evaluation of communications. Those two are the bedrocks of your profession. Anything in between, media relations, what have you, crisis comms, it's an area that you'll get into, but you need to understand the intricacies of strategic communication planning and of measurement and evaluation and learning on communications. If you have those two basic things really grasped very well, all the rest will flow, and you will clearly see where AI can make a difference. That's what I was saying before. If you don't have a clear view on your tasks, on your operations, on your workflows, you will not be able to determine if AI is going to make a difference or not. The only thing that you will be doing is spitting out press releases with AI, which is great, but it's sending out stuff, as I call it. It's not the real communications work. And so I think those things, critical thinking attitude on everything, strategic communication planning, getting a good grasp of the methodologies on how you create a good plan, on how you do relevant audience segmentation, all these things, and then measurement evaluation. Because if you don't integrate it into your planning, then it could go very wrong. Those are not too easy parts of our job. I mean, it takes a lot of study and experience and working on it and creating, but those are the bedrocks of what we do. And anything in between will become very clear, and then you'll be able to look at how AI gets integrated in that.
Fantastic. So we also have hi from Antonin, and then there's some quite interesting insights from Mr. Borremans. Thank you for sharing them. I think a combination of AI and VR for preparedness and catastrophic situations has huge potential. So now we move on to our recommendation. So, Philip, what are your recommendations for our audience?
Well, I was just checking. I sent a couple of recommendations, but I think there's so many in the last couple of months. I've seen so many colleagues, professionals creating a lot of really interesting stuff. Well, for those who are into podcasting and listening, I just published a list of my top 5, but the one that always pops up, and I think it's a great recognition for them, is the For Immediate Release podcast. It's the longest running public relations podcast in the world. Shell Holtz and Neville have been doing this for ages, and it's always interesting. I mean, every single episode, every single topic, the way that they bring it, the way that they analyze it, and they've been doing this for the last 20 years, I think, is always insightful. And they've got long forms and they've got short forms, but they're always interesting. So if you want to pick out a podcast about our profession, is For Immediate Release.
In fact, I was recommending this just last week, I think, and listened to Shell's last conversation with an AI. So he actually did the show talking directly to ChatGPT, which was a kind of interesting. I think you probably need to prompt it to be a bit more funny or crazy to make the thing more lively. But great. What else have you got to recommend?
No, I think, I mean, for those who still read paper or books or in digital format, there were a couple of very good books. Some of them will maybe not be of too interest if you're not in crisis or risk or emergency comms. But I think one book that is interesting to read and understand is, and I forgot the title now, but I'll be able to send that. But the topic there in that book is the human psychological emotional support that people need going through a crisis. And I'm not talking, I mean, that is applicable on natural emergencies, earthquake, terrible, but also in corporate crises. Because we often think, we go through these things and the crisis is done, what have you, and we've done a great job and what have you. But the emotional impact, the mental impact of a crisis, any kind of crisis, is often understated. And so it was a book there. Again, I'll share the link. I have a blank now on the title, which really looked at that aspect. And I think it's often forgotten. I mean, we completely forgot the impact of the latest pandemic on mental welfare, and it is important. So we need to recognize that. And another thing that I found interesting by reading this is that we communicators think that we're immune to that stuff, which is totally not true. Our own mental health has been a long taboo for ages. It's just since 2 years, thanks to the CIPR in the UK, that people are start talking about it. And I think it's very important to recognize that, specifically for people then who do my kind of job in crisis, emergency, and risk communication. Crises are our day-to-day job, but we often forget to switch off and to sit down and to take care of our own mental health. So that's an important aspect, I think, of any profession, but specifically true, I think, for communicators.
Yeah, I think you're right. And collectively, we've all been through a form of trauma with COVID. However you've experienced it, whether it's because you have you lost people close to you, or people who did. And now the war in Ukraine, the war in Israel, in Gaza. In Ukraine, we have some colleagues who work out of there. Every day they're experiencing something that we would consider a massive tragedy. And then at some point you just become used to it because it keeps going on. And I think that there is a problem of kind of this being, when it's in the front page news on an ongoing basis, at some point you just stop engaging with that to the same level. And of course, people are being deeply traumatized by this. So thank you for that. I also want to mention Wag the Dog, which is your fantastic blog, your newsletter and blog, which is very good. I don't know if you had any other recommendation before I move to Jesus.
No, of course, my newsletter, which is really a weekly update. I tend to focus a bit on crisis, risk, and emergency comms, but and AI and technology. And then it also has a podcast version, which is just a summary. And the podcast is created by AI. So you'll find a very nice lady being the host, not me. But she has a better voice, although she's completely, invented and technology driven. But it's a combination of newsletter and podcast. Yeah.
Jesus, what are your recommendations for our audience?
So I bring today a blogger. He's a bit younger than us, but quite knowledgeable. He's quite fresh and interesting to see the blog. Not too long videos about tech, also a lot into VR. It's called Mystical, and I like why also because he tries sometimes to kind of open chain and adjust some of the tools and all that. So there is a bit of techie part on the videos, which is interesting, but quite interesting the way that he does it. So voilà, that's my blog, my recommendation.
Okay, and my recommendation this week is a book by Robert Greene called Mastery. And if you're doing your New Year's resolution and you're thinking, what should I be doing in my life? This is actually about purpose. So finding your purpose, but it's a fairly intelligent kind of outline of the questions you should ask yourself, finding, what is also being termed as ikigai. What are you good at? What do you like doing? What can you get paid to do? And if you find that overlap, then you can go deep and become a deep expert at what you do and get the pleasure and satisfaction of doing that. And I think I like this concept. So a good one if you're doing your 2024 resolutions and setting goals. So I believe that's all we have time for. So have a fantastic weekend and stay warm because we're not out of that cold wave yet. Have a fantastic weekend and see you online. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.